What if I told you that medieval peasants, yes, the muddy, barefoot folks we picture toiling endlessly in fields, might have had more relaxing weekends than you?
No emails.
No late-night Slack messages. No Monday morning Zoom calls. Just feasting, dancing, sleeping under the trees, and drinking homemade beer with your neighbors. Sounds like a dream? It was their life. At least sometimes. We tend to imagine the Middle Ages as an age of endless suffering, oppression, backbreaking labor. And yes, life was hard. But it wasn't all misery. In fact, what if I told you that the average medieval peasant worked fewer days per year than many people do today? Forget what you learned in school. History isn't always what it seems. And today, we're diving into one of the most misunderstood lives in history, that of the medieval peasant. They were poor, yes. They lived without electricity, medicine, or modern comfort. But they also had community, festivals, stories by firelight, and, believe it or not, time. Time to rest, to be human. So, were medieval peasants really just miserable dirt farmers? Or did they know something about living well that we've forgotten? Let's go back in time and find out. To understand the life of a medieval peasant, we first need to understand their world, not just the physical one, but the world of time. You and I live by the hour, alarms, deadlines, calendar invites. But in the Middle Ages, time was ruled by something very different, the rhythm of the land and the church. The year was divided not by fiscal quarters, but by seasons and saints' days. There was planting season, harvest season, and the long, dark winters of rest. The church marked time with hundreds of feast days, holy days off from labor. And yes, peasants took them seriously. Some historians estimate that medieval peasants in parts of Europe had between 80 to 120 days off per year, sometimes more. That's more holidays than the average American gets today. So while you're debating whether to use your last vacation day, a 14th century farmer might be feasting at the village green. Again. Of course, life wasn't equal. Society was strictly divided. At the top, the monarch and the church. Below them, lords and knights. And at the very bottom, peasants. They worked the land, paid taxes, obeyed their lords. But even at the bottom, life had structure and surprising dignity. Peasant life wasn't aimless drudgery. It followed natural rhythms. Planting and reaping, birth and burial. The ringing of bells marked the hours, not clocks. And in this slow-moving world, time wasn't just money. It was sacred, communal, shared. Peasants may not have had much, but they had something we often lose, time that wasn't measured, but felt. The medieval peasant's life was not a relentless grind. Yes, there was hard work, long hours in the field, blisters, bruises, backaches. But their week, it had a rhythm, a balance, a pulse of effort and pause that many today would envy. Let's start with Sunday. It was sacred, the full day off, mass in the morning, rest in the afternoon, no plowing,
No harvesting. No smithing.
Even lords respected it. Breaking the Sabbath was a serious offense. And then, there were feast days. Medieval calendars were stuffed with saints, each one a reason to down tools and celebrate. Some feast days were local, some universal. But they added up, dozens of free days every year. Some weeks had 2 or 3. So no, peasants didn't labor 7 days a week without end. Most worked 4 or 5 full days with time for community, prayer, and leisure tucked in between. But what about the work itself? It was seasonal. Spring meant planting. Summer, long days in the sun, tending crops. Autumn brought the harvest, a frenzy of labor. But winter, that was different. In winter, the land slept, so did the tools. Peasants spent more time indoors repairing gear, spinning thread, brewing ale, and yes, resting. This idea might sound strange today, entire months of lighter work. But without artificial light or modern industry, winter was nature's signal to slow down. Their bodies followed the sun. They rose with it, slept soon after it set. Workdays could be long in midsummer, but short in winter. And even during labor, there was variety. Farming wasn't just one monotonous task. It was dozens. Weeding, digging, milking, churning, hauling, mending. Each day brought something different. Plus, they weren't alone. Work was social, communal. People sang as they sewed, shared jokes, shared meals. The village was a team, and when one had too much to do, others helped. Yes, there were pressures, rents to pay, lords to please. But many peasants had a surprising level of autonomy. They knew their land, knew the weather, the soil, the animals. Their life was local, measured not in paychecks or promotions, but in harvests and hearthfires. So while modern jobs blur the line between weekday and weekend, medieval peasants lived with a different rhythm. One that honored rest, respected the seasons, and left room for joy. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't endless toil either. Their weeks had weight and wonder. To a medieval peasant, time wasn't just measured by sunrise and sunset. It was measured by saints, seasons, and sacred celebrations. Their calendar didn't tick to the beat of deadlines. It sang to the rhythm of holy days. There were more than 50 official feast days in the medieval year. Some places had even more: local festivals, patron saints, miracles to remember. These weren't just excuses to skip work. They were the high points of life, the beating heart of the peasant's year. Each feast day began the same way, with church. Mass was mandatory. Sermons reminded the faithful why the day was holy. But once the prayers ended, the party began. There were games, dancing, pageants, and mystery plays. Jugglers, pipers, traveling storytellers. Feasting from noon until night. It was a chance to let go of toil and taste joy. And some feasts lasted for days. Christmas wasn't just a day, it was 12. Easter had its own week. May Day welcomed the spring with ribbons and revelry. And let's not forget Carnival, the chaotic, joyous celebration before Lent, when the world turned upside down. On these days, the normal rules softened. Lords might dine with peasants. Nobles handed out coins or bread. For a moment, the weight of hierarchy lifted. But there was more than merriment. These were deeply spiritual times too. Every feast honored something sacred: saints who protected the harvest, virgins who healed the sick, martyrs who symbolized strength. These weren't abstract legends. They were woven into daily life. Each family had favorite saints. Each region had special devotions. And those connections gave meaning to suffering and moments to celebrate survival. Feast days brought something modern weekends rarely do: collective joy. Everyone stopped. Everyone gathered. Everyone remembered. To the medieval peasant, a feast day wasn't just a break from work. It was a taste of heaven on earth, a moment of light in a life often marked by struggle. For most of the year, the medieval peasant's diet was humble: gruel, bread, onions, maybe a bit of cheese. But on weekends, feast days, or after the harvest, something special appeared on the table. Celebration didn't need gold or luxury. It came in the form of food, real, flavorful, and shared with everyone. Roast goose, honey cakes, pies filled with spiced apples, or stewed rabbit. These weren't daily fare, but they weren't unheard of either. On festival weekends, entire communities came together. Each family might bring a dish: bread from one, cheese from another, ale from the brewer down the lane. A rustic potluck born of necessity and joy. And then there was the drink. Ale was the drink of the people. Thick, slightly sour, made at home or in taverns, it was safer than water and a source of pride. Recipes passed from mother to daughter, some flavored with herbs, berries, even honey. After a long week in the fields, there was no greater relief than a tankard of ale and a song in your heart. Taverns were more than watering holes, they were social centers. You'd hear news, swap gossip, tell stories, flirt, argue, dance, and laughter came easily. There were games too: dice and bones, wrestling, foot races, tug of war. Children played tag while their elders debated who had the best turnips that year. Dancing wasn't just for the nobles. On summer nights, the village square filled with fiddle music and fast feet. Courting, celebrating, or simply chasing away sorrow, music gave peasants a voice and a rhythm. Romance bloomed, too. Away from the toil of daily life, There was space to notice someone's eyes, the way they laughed, the way they danced barefoot in the grass. In the modern world, our weekends can feel rushed, crowded by errands, scrolling screens, endless to-do lists. But to the medieval peasant, these rare moments of rest were sacred. Tangible, delicious, joyous. Their pleasures weren't grand, but they were real. Bread baked with care, ale brewed with pride, stories told with heart. They found celebration not in abundance, but in enough. And maybe, in their simple merrymaking, there's something we've lost, and something we can still find. For the medieval peasant, rest wasn't just a reward for hard work. It was a commandment, a sacred pause woven into the rhythm of life. The church was the great timekeeper of the Middle Ages. It marked not only the hours of the day, but the soul's journey through the year. Sunday was holy, a day of rest, and for peasants it offered a rare and vital reprieve. Beyond Sundays, there were dozens, sometimes over 100, holy days scattered across the calendar. The Feast of St. Michael, All Saints' Day, Christmas, Candlemas. Days when work in the fields was forbidden. Days to pray, to feast, or to simply breathe. Even those who toiled the hardest found space for stillness, reflection, renewal. Not every holy day was restful. Some involved pilgrimage, fasting, penance, but the church enforced a pattern of pause. It slowed the turning of the wheel. In monasteries, the motto was ora et labora, pray and work, but peasants too followed this rhythm. Life wasn't just labor, it was prayer in motion, a reverence for time itself. Evening prayers by firelight, a whispered Ave Maria, a candle lit for a sick child. These quiet acts grounded the soul. They gave meaning to the mundane. Modern weekends are noisy, fast, commercialized. But the medieval weekend, if we can call it that, was sacred in another way. Carved out space not for leisure, but for presence. Rest wasn't stolen. It was given. A pause not only for the body but for the spirit. We often imagine medieval peasants as crushed under endless labor, sunup to sundown, day after day. But dig into the records and a surprising truth emerges. The law actually gave them time off. By the 13th century, many peasants were bound not just by toil, but by tradition, and surprisingly, those traditions included rest. Religious feast days were enforced not only by the church, but sometimes by the local lord. Manorial records reveal that peasants could be fined for working on holy days. In other words, rest wasn't optional, it was expected. Some scholars estimate that, between Sundays, feast days, and festivals, the average medieval peasant might have had anywhere from 80 to 120 days off a year. That's more than many workers get today.
No emails. No smartphones.
Just a hard stop and a celebration. Of course, rest wasn't always comfortable. Medieval life was still harsh. But even within the struggle, the calendar offered rhythm and relief. Work hard, then rest because the law and God said so. Maybe that's the paradox. The poorer the people, the more fiercely they defended their right to pause. For medieval peasants, leisure wasn't just about resting weary bones. It was about joy, about community, about survival of the soul. Because when life was harsh, celebration was resistance. Feast days were more than a break from labor, they were the high points of the year. Villages held fairs with music, games, dancing, and of course food. So much food. Entertainment took many forms. Traveling performers, jesters, minstrels, and actors brought stories and laughter. Religious plays reminded villagers of heaven and hell, but also gave them a chance to laugh at the powerful. The fool wasn't just a clown. He was a release valve, mocking lords, bishops, even kings. In a world of strict hierarchy, these moments of upside-down freedom were precious. These festivals weren't luxuries. They were necessary. They stitched the community together. They passed on stories, songs, jokes, shared memories that helped people survive the dark winters ahead. To feast wasn't to forget hardship. It was to defy it. One good meal, one good laugh, could sustain a spirit through months of cold and toil. So when we think of the medieval weekend, we shouldn't imagine only mud and misery. We should see music, bonfires, and the fool's laughter echoing through the night. So, what can we learn from the weekends of medieval peasants? They had no vacations, no spa days, no Netflix queues. Yet somehow, they carved out time for rest, joy, and connection. They knew what we often forget. That rest is a right, not a reward. That celebration is not an indulgence, but a necessity. That leisure isn't just the absence of work, it's the presence of life. We live in a time where hustle is glorified, calendars are packed, and burnout is a badge of honor. But maybe, in chasing productivity, we've lost something our ancestors understood deeply. Medieval peasants didn't have much, but they had rhythm. They lived by the sun and the season. They honored holy days, not with guilt, but with gratitude, with community, with joy. Maybe it's not about going back, but about remembering. Remembering that even in the mud and hardship, people laughed. They danced. They rested. Because they had to. Because they deserved to. So next weekend, when the world tells you to hustle harder, maybe light a candle, break bread with friends, and listen for echoes of medieval joy. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and don't forget to rest.